How much do you know about the scandal that got Bill Clinton impeached?
Monica Lewinsky is under the microscope, Bill Clinton is under siege, and the White House is trying to contain the damage.
Maybe you know the basics. That Clinton's presidency came to a screeching halt amid a storm of accusations involving sex, power, and partisan warfare.
If it turns out to be true, it could be the end of Clinton's presidency.
Congress is rushing to overthrow the commander-in-chief.
What determines who we believe and whose side we take in a political fight?
Trip and secretly tape Monica Lewinsky.
Go down to Radio Shack and buy a tape recorder and plug it into your phone.
What does it mean to abuse one's power?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
It is absolutely staggering that the fate of the most powerful man on the planet is in the hands of a completely unknown 23-year-old intern.
Subscribe to Slow Burn and Apple Podcasts.
In late August 1992, Randy Weaver and his family were refusing to come down from the remote Idaho mountaintop where they lived.
Weaver, a fugitive on a federal firearms charge, has been holed up in a cabin near Naples for more than a year.
The government thought Randy Weaver was a dangerous, possibly violent extremist. Randy and his wife, Vicki, thought the government was an agent of Satan on Earth. When it was all over, 3 people were dead, and the government had spent millions of dollars to catch one man. We'll find out why the siege at Ruby Ridge unfolded the way it did, and think about some of the questions it raises. What should we do about white supremacists? Why has the story of Ruby Ridge become an enduring myth for the far right? And whose fault was it anyway? Subscribe to Standoff, What Happened at Ruby Ridge in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It is Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you again this week. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I co-host Split Zone Duo, a college football podcast. This week on the program, we've got a big show for you. We're going to learn about a standoff between UEFA, the governing body of international soccer in Europe, and Israel. That may now be diffused, but we'll see. Going forward, we're going to talk to the Times journalist Martin Ziegler about how this fight came to happen. We will welcome back sports business reporter Ken Belson of the New York Times to talk about the continued storm, it doesn't end, around the NFL and its selection of a Super Bowl halftime performer, Bad Bunny. We will check in on the ongoing baseball playoffs with both league championship series going on right now. And we'll talk about new developments in the college football coaching buyout industrial complex after Penn State moved to fire its longtime head coach, James Franklin, in a shocker. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter covering the key stories of the moment in women's sports, and the women's sports lead at CBS Sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm doing great. Aces cemented their dynasty. WNBA finals are over. It was quite the season, and I'll be honest, I did not mind the sweep workload-wise. I got to watch a full Panthers game start to finish over the weekend, and it was a fun one to watch.
Yes, I bet that was fun.
Yeah.
You get to play the Miami Dolphins. It should always be fun.
No. It's better, Alex. We got to. We beat the Dallas Cowboys.
Sorry, the Dolphins was the other week. I'm not. That's 2 in a row for the Panthers.
It's called a winning streak.
Yeah,
okay.
I know. I had to look it up.
Don't let the Panthers get hot.
They're hot. It's happening. And of course, we have Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer and co-hosts the Effect of the Wild baseball podcast. Ben, are you big dumping?
Very much so. Still mentally, emotionally recovering from Friday night's 15-inning affair. Despite not being a Mariners fan or a Tigers fan, I felt like I was somehow a fan of both of them. That's how high stakes and huge and never-ending that game felt.
Playoff baseball is very intense. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with it, given the pirates of it all.
Yeah.
But I have felt it in my bones watching games. I went to Game 4 of Dodgers-Phillies as a fan last week and was nibbling on fingernails until the Phillies blew that game in one of the more catastrophic fashions imaginable.
Yes. I would put it second only perhaps to the hockey playoffs when it comes to anxiety-induced.
I think there's a good case to be made that could even be number one.
Yeah.
When you're a fan of a team involved. But yeah, for neutrals, I think the thing about the baseball playoffs that always gets me is that you really have no clue when it's going to end. And the hockey playoffs, you can sort of feel like a goal's coming, like everyone's tired, like someone's going to let one in. And they usually do. But that Mariners thing, it felt like it took forever, and I really had no sense of when it was going to end. Anyway, before we get into our business, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members for making the show possible. Subscribing helps us make the show. It allows you to get it ad-free, which is a great perk, and you get bonus segments. And there is good news, which is that we've got one of those live for Slate Plus members right now. Just mentioned it. It is about the buyout industrial complex in college football on the occasion of Penn State firing its head coach, James Franklin. You can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking try free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. Earlier this month, before Israel and Hamas agreed to a U.S.-mediated ceasefire, the governing body for international soccer across Europe looked poised to take a vote on whether to boot out Israel's national teams. In lieu of a litany of international bodies, including the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, finding that Israel's conduct in Gaza amounted to a genocide, it appeared that UEFA's member football associations were about to give Israel the boot. But shortly before the vote was about to happen, Donald Trump announced a rough outline of a peace plan, and UEFA, to date, has held off on taking that ballot. The reporter who broke the news of that planned vote, Martin Ziegler of the British outlet The Times, is kind enough to join us on the show right now. Martin, how are you?
Hi, guys. Yeah, good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Great to have you. Israel has been a UEFA member since 1994. We have many questions about this story, but I'll start here. Where did the pressure within UEFA originate to vote on removing the Israeli national teams from competition? And is that outcome still on the table in light of, for now, a tenuous ceasefire and peace agreement being in place?
Yeah, I think it had built up, actually, over the last couple of years. It's more and more people, lots of the news coming out from Gaza, the death toll rising, the sort of destruction. And then I think people thinking, look, we've banned Russia for invading Ukraine. Why are we not taking similar steps towards Israel? And there were certain countries, Norway particularly, I think we're pretty hard on that. Spain, Italy as well. And I think there was just a feeling which grew. And then within the actual administration and the UEFA president, Alexander Sheferin, you saw there was before the UEFA Super Cup in August, they had this big banner, "Stop killing children, stop killing civilians." I think that was an indication that they were sort of moving towards that as well. And then I think when the UN Commission of Inquiry had this report of this finding of genocide, that probably was about to push things over the line.
And then this agreement comes into play, and it seems like it just halts, at least the action within UEFA. Is that an accurate understanding of where we are, just sort of now in a holding pattern for at least a bit, as we see if this peace agreement holds up over the months ahead?
Yeah, I think so. I think when the peace agreement was announced and that it got political backing from a lot of the Arab countries, Turkey, and then some Muslim countries like Indonesia, I think that probably persuaded UEFA just to hold off. I think they were determined to do it. In fact, I noticed the Norwegian Football Association president, Lisa Klaveness, is also a UEFA executive committee member. She told the New York Times at the weekend that the momentum was building. And but when the peace deal was announced, they decided they needed to wait. And it would have seemed a bit strange, I think, given what's happened this week. If UEFA had taken that action, then it would have seemed a bit strange. So to hold off, I think, was the right thing to do.
We're talking to you on Tuesday, the day that a qualifier will be played between Israel and Italy. This past weekend, Israel played a qualifier match against Norway and was beaten 5-0. Can you describe the preparations, the security, the safety concerns here, the rallies and demonstrations that have surrounded these games?
Yeah, I think there was the protests were probably not as great as they might have been again if it hadn't been for this peace deal and the ceasefire. But certainly the Norwegian Football Association were very aware it's going to be a very expensive security operation for them. Something they'd actually, one official said that they'd never envisaged or had to deal with anything like this in terms of organising a football match in terms of the security. So it was something they had to try and cope with. And I think with Italy's match, again, they chose a venue in Udine, quite a difficult place to get to in Italy. It's not like Rome or Milan where you can fly in easily. It's a long journey to get there, and in a small stadium. And I think they're selling a small number of tickets. I think that was all sort of deliberate to try and minimise the number of people going and make it not easy for it to be disrupted by protesters. So especially Italy, I mean, both Italy and Norway feelings have been really strong. In Italy, you had the Coaches Association actually issuing a statement saying Israel should be kicked out of European football. So feelings were running high, not just politically, but actually within football there.
We're here in the United States, of course, where our politics is interesting at all times and has been a big part of this story with Trump declaring victory with this peace deal. And at the peace summit in Egypt on Monday, we're talking on Tuesday, he invited Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, up there. Trump had previously shared on his True Social platform speaking out against UEFA's proposed decision, saying, of course, that Israel would be welcome to the United States if in the World Cup, if they qualified. Where does Infantino fit into this? I know there were some promises to help Palestinian football. Where do things currently sit with that?
Yeah, I mean, he's caught between a rock and a hard place because at the one hand, he's been very, very close to Donald Trump, been to the Oval Office numerous times, and we saw it actually. He didn't turn up for his own FIFA Congress earlier this year because Donald Trump had invited him to a Gulf summit. So that just shows just how important he views this relationship with Donald Trump. And so, yes, as soon as he got the nod from Trump to go to Egypt, obviously he was on his private jet. But he also, he owes a lot to Saudi Arabia. He owes a lot to Qatar. They've been supported him politically and financially and supported FIFA in many, many ways. So, he can't be seen to be too pro-Israel, but Donald Trump means that he can't be seen to be anti-Israel either, because I see that Trump's made that pretty clear. So he's walked this sort of this tightrope wire for quite a long time. He has been very careful to ensure no decisions have been made about Israel. The Palestinian Football Association has brought proposals and requests for action to be taken over Israel. They've said that settler communities have been illegally playing football and they shouldn't have been. And so he's kicked the can down the road, essentially, and he probably thinks now that was the right thing to have done. But it's still, for many people, it's remarkable. You see all these sorts of political figures, and then there's Gianni Infantino at the end. Strange, but there we are.
Martin, Israel has, I think, a significant preoccupation with these soft power platforms, you would call them, throughout Europe. Israel has thrown a significant fit over the possibility that it might be removed from Eurovision in the last handful of years, and I imagine was not pleased about the possibility of being bounced from UEFA. What have you learned about the internal Israeli response, and frankly, what have you seen in the external public Israeli response to the specter of being removed?
Well, I mean, they're not just not happy, they were very alarmed at the prospect. They thought if UEFA was going to suspend them, other sports would follow. And somebody said they were terrified that they were going to be viewed as the sort of like apartheid South Africa, as being sort of pariahs in international sport. That's, they were really worried about this. I actually think that UEFA's threat was quite significant. I'm not saying that the peace deal wouldn't have happened without it, but actually I think I know that Benjamin Netanyahu was personally involved in working against this politically, against the UEFA threat. So that just shows how seriously they took it.
Yeah, I was going to end on something along those lines, just asking whether sports really does have a substantive role to play in shaping geopolitics, because we have seen this extend a bit beyond soccer. There was a professional cycling team called Israel Premier Tech that's rebranding due to protests. There's a Israeli gymnastics team that was banned from a competition in Indonesia. So is it sort of self-important to think that some sports governing body banning a country from competition has a real effect, or can it? Because after all, it's not as if Russia has withdrawn from Ukraine in the face of this international sports pressure.
No, I don't think it has necessarily has a decisive effect, but I think it has there's a cumulative effect. I mean, I started in journalism when apartheid South Africa was still a thing, and I remember when that came down and how important sport was to the South Africans and how important it was to get back into international sport after that happened. So I think it definitely had an impact there, the sporting boycott in South Africa. I think the Russian boycott definitely is an issue for them. I don't think it's something they think it is worth it in order for Putin to pursue his agenda in Ukraine. But I think all these things weigh heavily on political leaders, and they had it's definitely part of their thinking.
Martin Ziegler of The Times, thank you so much for joining us across many time zones to share some observations from your reporting on this saga. We appreciate you being here.
Great stuff. Enjoyed that, guys. Thank you.
Up next, we'll talk with the NFL and sports business writer Ken Belson of the New York Times. Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. For all the financial advisors out there, let's talk bonds for a minute. Capturing value in fixed income isn't always easy, but Vanguard bonds are institutional quality, which means top-grade products across the board. Vanguard's lineup includes over 80 bond funds that are actively managed by a 200-person global team of sector specialists, analysts, and traders. Vanguard's long-standing establishment and scale allows them to invest across all kinds of sectors, maturities, and geographies, which means they can spot and act on opportunities that others might miss. Vanguard takes a steady approach and focuses on reliability and consistency rather than going all in on risky bets. It sets the standard for what dependable investing should look like. So if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/audio. That's Vanguard.com/audio. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
After a long day, you can pour yourself a glass of cucumber, melon, lime, or sparkling THC to relax. Or you can reach for Sol's out-of-office gummies and drinks instead. They'll help you unwind and ease into your evening without the alcohol or the next day fog. Speaking as someone who has some cucumber, melon, lime, sparkling THC in his fridge right now, I can attest that it's really nice to have on hand. Sol is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. Sol specializes in delicious, hemp-derived THC and CBD products designed to boost your mood and help you unwind. their best-selling out-of-office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe, from a gentle 1.5 milligram microdose to their newest 15 milligram gummy for a more elevated experience. Bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering Hang Up listeners 30% off your entire order. Go to getsoul.com and use the code HANGUP. That's getsoul.com, promo code HANGUP for 30% off. Last week, on our Hang Up and Listen bonus segment for Slate Plus members, the three of us talked about the NFL's selection of Bad Bunny, who raps in Spanish, for the Super Bowl halftime act, and specifically how the NFL just didn't seem all that concerned in the way that a lot of other businesses might with becoming a target for a right-wing backlash campaign, in part because the NFL is so big, so ubiquitous, that it just doesn't have to care. And yet this story has persisted now into its incredible 3rd week. That story, of course, is the response of the American right wing to Bad Bunny being involved in this halftime show. Headlining it last week, a story in Front Office Sports was titled, How the NFL Can Get Its Arms Around Bad Bunny Situation. Subhead, the league is off to a record-setting TV clip this year. Does it want to risk that momentum? It suggested that the NFL's pending deal with ESPN over a bunch of media assets might be in danger given the mafioso style of federal regulation that now exists in the media sector. And one option that was put forward in the story was keep Bad Bunny in the halftime show, but add MAGA-friendly performers. It all does beg the question, is the NFL actually worried about this? And to answer it, we've got the veteran New York Times sports business reporter Ken Belson back on the show on the day of publication of his new book, Every Day is Sunday, How Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, and Roger Goodell turned the NFL into a cultural and economic juggernaut. Few people have reported more on NFL power brokers than Ken. And so Ken, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Second of all, it's not like the NFL didn't game out that there would be a racist backlash to Bad Bunny being in the halftime show. I assume they prepared for this. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, Apple and Rock Nation do the selection, but yes, everything goes through the NFL at some point. They learned their lesson way back when Janet Jackson had her wardrobe malfunction, that they no longer just outsource it entirely to others. But look, we're in the middle of October and we're talking about the halftime show. In that sense, yeah, any news is good news, right? I mean, they have in years past waited longer to announce the halftime show, and maybe they wanted to announce it now so that people got it out of their system and got pissed off and moved on. Because time after time, season after season, when we get into November and then the playoffs, that's what Americans are focused on. They're not focused on the halftime show. There was a similar uproar when Lady Gaga was performing 10 years ago. Was she going to say something political? In the end, she didn't. But it was part of the quote unquote drama of it. It's obviously a little different this time. You have a very aggressive campaign against Bad Bunny in a way that didn't exist with her a decade ago. But I also think the NFL's been a little smarter, and there's a discussion of this in the book about how the NFL manages crises in general. And they were clearly caught blindsided, if you will, by the blowback to the Colin Kaepernick-inspired kneeling. But now you've seen, Donald Trump was invited to the Super Bowl. The language was changed. The stenciled language at the end of the end zones was sort of toned down. When the NFL decided to announce that the draft was going to be in Washington in 2027, they did it in the Oval Office. And Josh Harris gave Trump a jersey that said, you're the ultimate commander. He gave him a commander's jersey. So I think the NFL is trying to be a little more nimble about how to do this. They can't shout out or shout above right-wing media that's complaining about Bad Bunny. But at the end, they have to appeal to their core audiences too, and that means younger people. And that's why we're seeing this string of rap artists over the last few years, dating back, since Rock Nation got involved. So I think that's probably where their head's at, is, like you said, they're off to, it's not hurting their TV ratings for their games. I watched both of the Monday night games yesterday. They're on a roll. I don't think they want to mess with that.
I was watching the Naked Gun reboot this past weekend, and Frank Drebin Jr., played by Liam Neeson, says that his character is still furious about the Janet Jackson incident more than 20 years later, which just goes to show how long these things can linger in the cultural memory. So, yeah, we've discussed this Bad Bunny situation since we talked about it last time. Turning Point USA tried to counter-program with what they are calling the All-American halftime show. They put it up to a listener vote, or they asked for nominations for who should perform. One of the options for genres was, quote, anything in English. So I wonder why you think we've seen fewer clashes in this administration than we have the first Trump administration with the NFL. Is it just that we haven't seen the same confluence of social events and incidents and Kaepernick and anthem protests and all the rest? Or is it that the NFL is too big to confront in some sense? Or did the league itself learn a lesson from the first go-round and now, as you said, has found a way to thread the needle because it's so ultra-popular that no one really wants to go after it, but maybe it has actually learned some lessons with how not to have things come to a head?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything you said. I mean, that the owners have learned, the players are not protesting. That was a big deal back then. And look, 70% of the NFL players are generally, on average, are players of color, and 70% of the NFL audience is white. So you do have a sort of potential for culture clash that you probably don't see in a lot of other leagues, as pronounced. So that's always there. Having said that, people just want to watch football, and the NFL is delivering it. 2 games on Monday nights now, Thursday night, overseas games. It almost seems like bonus time when you get a 9:30 game in the morning on the East Coast. So I think they're just trying to stay in their lane, if you will. And they have taken steps, as I said, to tone down some of the programming, the diversity programming they've had. They canceled or delayed, depending on how you look at it, their accelerated program, which was supposed to happen last December. They put it off for a year, where they bring in young executives of color for a networking event. This is often built around the NFL quarterly meetings. And there were a lot of questions. Are you doing this to placate Trump? And, the NFL said no, but the optics are there. They also took away the end racism wording at the end of the back line of the end zone. Again, same thing. Well, that was just we're just changing up the messaging. Owners have said to me quietly they are going to tone down some of the messaging around DEI. They're not going to scrap the Rooney Rule, but they are, I guess trying to insulate themselves is probably the best way to put it.
Ken, when you were reporting your book, what did you learn? I mean, this is a big question, but how did the NFL become almost bigger than America itself culturally? Was there one kind of turning point that maybe surprised you or that you feel like doesn't get talked about enough?
It's a little bit geeky, but in the last chapter, there's a sort of a detailed discussion of with Brian Rolapp, the former head of media at the NFL. And, it's a bit of a cliche, and I had to guard against this myself as a journalist, because you've been swimming in this pool where I know the language they speak, and I understand their motivations in a way that the average outside reader doesn't. So I have to kind of remind myself, I know too much in some senses. But Brian kept talking about, reach, and how the NFL through all of these years has stuck with CBS, Fox, and NBC, and ABC, ESPN to reach the most number of viewers possible on Sundays, Mondays, Thursdays, every day. And so it seemed quaint. I remember hearing it years ago. We're all about reach. We want to be in 90% of households across America. We want to have that access. We want to be in front of people. Well, guess what? The cable market has fallen apart. Baseball is struggling to get their local games on TV. Basketball and hockey teams are trying to reformulate for the streaming world. And in some cases, they're going back to over-the-air TV or some mixture of. And so I think the I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, and then sort of on reflection, it made more sense. By sticking with those big broadcasters, they were getting, or continue to get, 17 to 20 million viewers for an average football game on a Sunday early in the season when they're competing against baseball and everything else. And so I think that strategy looks really smart now. Now, of course, fans are now seeing they're nibbling at it, and they're putting a game on Paramount or Peacock or Netflix on Christmas, and the Black Friday game on in November. But by and large, they're sticking with this strategy, and I think that's something I didn't fully calculate. It was just sort of part of the ether when you're covering the league every year. And now I look back and I look at how the other leagues are struggling to find audience, and the NFL is still getting the big numbers. Their numbers have come down too, but nothing like baseball, for instance, or even the NBA Finals. Maybe I only get 6-7 million for a finals matchup.
I think it's also interesting as you tie it back to, or as I would offer to tie it back to the way the NFL manages crises, that it sort of has tentacles everywhere. Not to say, for instance, that Fox News, which is a different part of the Rupert Murdoch media empire than Fox, the channel that broadcasts NFL games, hasn't done anything to shovel coal into the outrage furnace about Bad Bunny. But I think for the most part, it seems, Ken, like the NFL has been able to keep not just this crisis, but most of the non-Kaepernick crises that it's seen over the last decade or so to really being things that people are mad about on the internet rather than things that really have credence lent to them by major broadcasters, in part because, well, the NFL does billions of dollars of business with just about every major broadcaster. I guess the exception to that being CNN and the Warner Brothers Discovery empire that's now being split apart. Do you see that as part of the NFL's intentional benefits that they try to derive from these partnerships, or are they just lucky like they always are? You write in this book about the good fortune that the league enjoys in so many different respects.
Yeah. I mean, look, there have been crises besides Kaepernick that have risen above the games and above the networks, and frankly shook the league to its core. I look back to the Ray Rice episode in 2014. That was as close as Roger Goodell came to being fired in his tenure. He had come out, suspended him for 2 games, got the video, just made it look much, much worse. There was a controversy over the video. And he didn't talk outside of an interview he did on CBS, shortly after. He didn't talk for 2 weeks. And that press conference was a disaster. The NFL, that resonated. I remember, women's groups are up in arms. All sorts of people were saying the NFL is about violence and women. And that was alienating huge sponsors. That put sponsors in a bad position too. But let's face it, the sponsors have paid billions along with the networks and they just want to show the games. They want this to end too. And so, they don't want to fuel it. They want to somehow, get through it, acknowledge it, but then get through it. I remember talking to Joe Buck. I don't know if it's in the book, but Joe Buck, right before the Super Bowl in Houston, right at the beginning of the first Trump administration, when he was banning certain people who came from certain countries in the Middle East, and there were protests outside the convention center down in Houston where the Super Bowl sort of festivities were. And I was asking Joe Buck, how are you going to handle this during the broadcast? He says, I don't have time to talk about the Iranian missile crisis or anything else in between third down and second and third down. We got replays to do. The fans that's not why they tune in. So I think the networks are part of the trying to maintain the focus on the games, and the NFL benefits from that, obviously.
You frame the book around these 3 famous or infamous figures, Goodell, Jones, and Kraft, the last 2 of whom have recently been the subjects of docuseries or participated in them even, docuseries that sort of burnished their legacies in some respects, at least. We talked about this during the Micah Parsons Cowboys saga, the idea that Jerry Jones just wants attention, good or bad, it all works to his benefit. Is there's no such thing as bad publicity aspect to these figures, or at least Jones? Do they just crave the spotlight even if it makes them look bad because we're talking about them and we're watching them?
Yeah, that's certainly Jerry's abiding philosophy, which he learned very early on. There's a fun conversation in the book with Jared Bell, the columnist now of USA Today, longtime columnist, and he worked at the Cowboys, and Jerry took him aside very early after he'd bought the team, and he said, how come Tex Schramm gets such good media publicity? He just had a 3-13 season. He's the GM, and the team's gone down the toilet. And Jared said, oh, it's easy. He's available. he'll pick up the phone. You can call him at home. And reporters, let's face it, we want access. I mean, we want to hear from the principals, and Tex always did that, and Jerry took that to heart, and he really has tried to be as accessible as, frankly, more accessible than any owner in the league, and maybe in professional sports, with the exception of maybe Mark Cuban. And so, is it winning in football games? Absolutely not. Has it made him $1 billion in operating revenue? Yes. People want to buy merchandise. They want to be attached to the Cowboys brand here and overseas. The stadium is a big money maker. So it depends on your point of view. I'm not a Cowboys fan, full disclosure. So, I don't care whether he makes a Super Bowl or not. It doesn't matter to me. His fans see it differently. I certainly see that. But Jerry's a businessman, right? He's a businessman who happens to own a football team also. Robert is different. Robert is a little more gun shy with the media than he used to be. I think he feels a little burned. He also, was dealing with the Belichick-Brady mess for so many years that I think he's fully gray now. Of course, he's also 84. I think that kind of wore him out. That was a lot. And he's had a couple of terrible years on the field. Finally seems to be kind of righting the ship. So they're compelling characters. They both love the media. They're still the only two owners that reliably talk after pretty much most quarterly meetings. And they do it very differently. Roberts is always staged. You're told to meet somewhere. There's a microphone. Somebody's shouting out, okay, you're next. Jerry, you just chase him down a hallway. You get him 2 steps before he's in the limo, and he still stops. Then 1 step in front of the limo, he answers a few more. They're very, very different people, but they're still the two last sort of holdouts in terms of accessibility.
One of the biggest stories around the NFL in the past couple of decades has been concussions, of course. And, recently I was surprised the story didn't get more play, although I understand why. I know you reported on it, but a rogue gunman came into the NFL office buildings with a gun and murdered someone. And it was found that he did have CTE. But, I think that story, you don't want, when someone commits a violent act, you don't want to give them the attention that they were seeking necessarily. But it was still, to me, a very striking story of someone really suffering with CTE who had only played football at the lower levels and really wanted to see someone held accountable. We've seen the NFL take a lot of, on the surface, precautions, and the story has gone away a lot about how dangerous the sport is. What did you learn about how the NFL has almost kind of made it through that crisis?
You raise a really interesting point. I mean, the NFL, again, talking about how they deal with crises, the league is staffed with lawyers and marketing people. Let's face it. The lawyers try and reduce the liability, which they did in the concussion case through the settlement. And the marketers are all about spinning it forward, finding quote unquote solutions. Safer helmets with quotation marks, safer tackling with quotation marks, changing the narrative. We're here to help. And they've done that. What they haven't done is address the long-term problems, right? So they've tried to reassure parents that it's okay for Johnny to suit up. But let's face it, it's a collision sport. And there's plenty of medical evidence now that it's a dose response. The longer you play, the higher the risk. So the fact that he cited the killer cited CTE tells me it's now part of the lexicon, and it kind of won't really go away now, as much as the NFL wants it to. It was a really kind of grim reminder of it. And the fact that a kid who played some high school football is now sort of openly saying, I probably have CTE, please study my brain, is a pretty remarkable thing about how it's part of the permanent dialogue around football that I don't think the NFL can fully shake.
You write about how the NFL's ascendance wasn't preordained, so it's not inevitable that its current cultural hegemony will last forever. And in your last chapter, you even entertain the idea that the league's profitability will turn out to have been a football bubble. So what, if anything, does the NFL need to do to retain its unparalleled popularity? And if it eventually falters, what will be its downfall?
Boy, those are big questions. There's a couple of things I've thought about. One is the demographics of America, and this is not just a football thing, but the demographics of America are something the NFL is keenly aware of, the slowing birth rate. So the NFL, one of the reasons why you're seeing such a push overseas is the NFL is looking for new audiences. Like, they have essentially saturated the media universe here in the States. So that's a risk that they could peak because our population isn't growing and people aren't moving to streaming as fast, or they are, but they're not paying for it. Piracy is a potential threat when it comes to streaming. So there's a lot of potential pitfalls there. That's the one. And the other, to Lindsay's point, is the concussion issue, although we've moved past the sort of crisis stage, there's no doubt, and I've done a lot of youth sports stories, that parents have moved their kids into baseball, basketball, soccer, other sports, swimming, not Pop Warner football. And so now the NFL has countered with flag, and it has kept kids engaged in football, but they're not suiting up with pads at such an early age. And by the way, when you take up baseball as a young player, you tend to play it 24/7 all year round. So there's no window for you to get back into football. So I think the pipeline is something of a risk. And then you have NIL. We haven't talked about that. And players in college now are permanent free agents, and they know they can go to the highest bidder. That's going to create a very different players union, NFL players union in the coming years. I think
That's
players are going to look at it differently. They're going to say, oh, you want me to show up to the draft and hug Roger Goodell? Pay me. You want me to come to the combine and run the 40? Pay me. It will take the higher players, the higher round draft picks to do that. But you've seen it in tennis. You've seen how the players like Nadal and Federer fought on behalf of the lower ranked players to get them more prize money. So, and they don't even have a players union to speak of. So I think we're going to see a lot of different push points that the NFL is going to have to navigate. What pushes them over the plateau? I don't know. It may be just saturation, that they just can't grow as fast as they used to. They're still printing money. They're getting private equity to come in, write them checks. They're moving overseas. The international gambit is a long-term play. I don't see a Super Bowl in London. I don't see teams in London for maybe ever. I know it's talked about, but I just don't see it as a practicality at the moment. So there's a lot out there the NFL stays up and thinks about.
He is Ken Belson. He's a sports business reporter for the New York Times. And the book out right now is Every Day is Sunday, How Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, and Roger Goodell Turned the NFL into a Cultural and Economic Juggernaut. Ken, thanks for giving us the lay of the land.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate it.
Up next, are the Seattle Mariners a team of destiny?
Yes.
You heard it right there.
How much do you know about the scandal that got Bill Clinton impeached?
Monica Lewinsky is under the microscope, Bill Clinton is under siege, and the White House is trying to contain the damage.
Maybe you know the basics. That Clinton's presidency came to a screeching halt amid a storm of accusations involving sex, power, and partisan warfare.
If it turns out to be true, it could be the end of Clinton's presidency.
Congress is rushing to overthrow the commander-in-chief.
What determines who we believe and whose side we take in a political fight?
Trip and secretly tape Monica Lewinsky.
Go down to Radio Shack and buy a tape recorder and plug it into your phone.
What does it mean to abuse one's power?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
It is absolutely staggering that the fate of the most powerful man on the planet is in the hands of a completely unknown 23-year-old intern.
Subscribe to Slow Burn and Apple Podcasts.
In late August 1992, Randy Weaver and his family were refusing to come down from the remote Idaho mountaintop where they lived.
Weaver, a fugitive on a federal firearms charge, has been holed up in a cabin near Naples for more than a year.
The government thought Randy Weaver was a dangerous, possibly violent extremist. Randy and his wife, Vicky, thought the government was an agent of Satan on Earth. When it was all over, 3 people were dead, and the government had spent millions of dollars to catch one man. We'll find out why the siege at Ruby Ridge unfolded the way it did, and think about some of the questions it raises. What should we do about white supremacists? Why has the story of Ruby Ridge become an enduring myth for the far right? And whose fault was it anyway? Subscribe to Standoff, What Happened at Ruby Ridge in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
The Major League Baseball postseason has been a bit of a belter. It's been a lot of fun, and we haven't talked about it a ton on Hang Up and Listen because of the weekly nature of our show recordings. These things tend to get outdated fairly quickly. For instance, both of the league championship series are already going on. You've got the Los Angeles Dodgers up 1-0 on the Milwaukee Brewers as we record on this fine Tuesday morning. And you've got, of course, the Seattle Mariners heading north of the border, but south in general, Seattle north of Toronto, people forget this, to play the Toronto Blue Jays in the American League. And I think that the Mariners have become sort of the team of the internet, Ben Lindbergh, over the course of this season. For a couple of reasons. They're sort of a likable but tortured franchise that's had a lot of superstars but has never gotten over the hump, has rarely even gotten close to getting over the hump. And of course, they've got now one of the most likable baseball players of all time, Cal Big Dumper Raleigh, the 60 home run switch hitting catcher. And they're up 2-0 against the Toronto Blue Jays, which is occasion enough for us to talk about this team, even though they're in the middle of a series and the results will shift over the time that people are listening to this show. Ben, Mariners. Team of destiny?
Certainly looking like that, given how they have completely cooled off the Blue Jays in their first two games of this series. We saw Trey Savage just dominate the Yankees, and we saw the Blue Jays bats dominate too. And the first couple games, Mariners have beaten up on Savage, shut down the bats. It's just been a masterful performance in Toronto, no less. So big advantage, Mariners heading home here with a 2-0 lead. I guess the Mariners have long been the team of the internet, given how many prominent bloggers have been Mariners fans, but they did at some point this season vault into not just lovable losers, you root for them because they're kind of cursed and have the longest professional sports drought for not making the playoffs, but because they started to seem like maybe the best team in the league. And certainly looking at how they were configured for a postseason series, given the amount of starting pitching they had, which was sort of disappointing this season. The bats sort of exceeded expectations and the pitchers kind of fell short of them. But you look at how their rotation lines up in a short series. You look at Cal, you look at Julio, you look at the guys that they added at midseason, Naylor and Suarez and Jorge Polanco getting huge hits. And yeah, they're pretty scary. Their bullpen has failed them a little of late. That was supposed to be a strength as well, but they're looking pretty good right now, and they are easy to root for, given their track record of never having won a pennant in their entire history.
Lindsay, it's time to ask, have you adopted the Seattle Mariners as your team?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all in.
Now that the Padres are out.
Padres are out. You told me to root for the Guardians. That did not last long. So, I'm going through it. But honestly, I'll admit, while I have been watching the games, it wasn't until the WNBA finals ended that I could really fully give now my attention to the MLB playoffs in an intense way. It was really funny. I was, winding down all the coverage after game 4 of the Aces sweep. And, I was writing an Asia piece until like 12:30 and editing things for CBS. And I get done and I'm like, oh, there's still baseball on. So I got to wind down from like that like crazy night of work with this 15 inning intense baseball game. Did not sleep well that night. That was not a relaxing coda to the evening necessarily.
No one who watched it did, I don't think. And yeah, I am on record as a longtime hater of the zombie runner, the extra runner that starts extra innings on second base in the regular season. That is suspended for the postseason. And I think it's an abomination at all times, but I do understand the goal, at least, of shortening games in the regular season when the stakes are a little lower. But then October rolls around, and if we are blessed with a 15-inning marathon like that, then we remember why those long games are great for the sickos, for us, for people who are going to be tuning in and just hanging on every pitch. I mean, that was just the most anxiety-inducing, on the edge of your seat. Hard to say whether both teams wanted it or neither team wanted it. They were both blowing all sorts of chances, and you could either ding the hitters for not converting or credit the pitchers for holding the line. But man, that was just among the best spectator experiences.
I believe there were 5 occasions, if I'm counting right. It might have been 4, it might have been 6, just in extra innings before the Mariners won the game, where a leadoff runner was at second base with nobody out, and they did not score, which was a nice introduction to the baseball experience for casuals. It's sort of a sport that makes you very unhappy and annoyed and intense and tense, even as you're nominally having fun watching it. It was a proper baseball game.
But then, I still haven't fully recovered from that game, and the players are already playing other games in other, states, which is another reason why baseball is just wild to me.
That's the thing. Yeah, everyone was thinking, the Blue Jays must be loving this. From their perspective, they'd like these teams to play forever so that whoever they play in the ALCS will be exhausted. But it's not as if the Mariners have shown any signs of a hangover, any ill effects from that, even though they couldn't line up their rotation the way they wanted to. So you never know. It is completely unpredictable. It's the baseball playoffs. Hot teams go cold, cold teams get hot. But it is an unusual situation for the Mariners, who never even really make it to this stage, to have made it, but also to have been one of the favorites, if not the favorite, heading into October. And they've looked like it thus far.
So before we fully dive into what's coming next or what's happening now, as a casual, it felt surprising that the Yankees didn't are out already. Was that actually surprising? And kind of what happened there?
Yeah, well, the Yankees did make it to the World Series last year before they spectacularly combusted against the Dodgers.
That very well, yes.
Yes, who could forget? But they are now working on what is, for this franchise, a protracted title drought. They have not won a World Series since 2009. They still have a winning record every year. They almost always make the playoffs, but they have been flawed each year. And so it's not as if they were some juggernaut, that it was a huge upset for them to lose. I think their fans have kind of become fatalistic about this era of Yankees baseball and sort of were expecting them to blow it. So they had holes, they had injuries, I guess everyone does at this stage, but they went through the whole season having had Juan Soto depart to go to the Mets, who missed the playoffs, and Garrett Cole, their ace, got hurt and missed the whole season. So on the whole, I would say it was actually a fairly successful season, or at least most teams would consider it to be fairly successful, but Yankees fans' brains have been broken by the Steinbrenner era, the original Steinbrenner era, and the late 90s, early 2000s dynasty. And I was a Yankees fan at that time, and so I know what it's like to be a member of the cult and to believe that you are entitled to a championship every year. And now they're having a hard adjustment to just kind of being another good team that spends a lot, but not more than some of the other big spenders, and isn't actually entitled to just win a title every year.
And another thing that happened I feel like we should bring up, and Alex mentioned it a little bit in the opener, was just that the Phillies ending.
Yeah.
That is there anything more heartbreaking than seeing, as a, pseudo-neutral, seeing a team end on that much of a brain fart? I don't know what else to call it except just
that's what it was.
A completely inexplicable blunder that this person who's worked their entire lives to get to this moment and then melts down in one of the most spectacular ways possible. I mean, it's excruciating.
It was. Yeah, it was really hard to watch. I just sort of moaned. I emitted a moan just watching that. And even if I were a Dodgers fan, I think I would have been happy to win, but I would have wanted to win some other way because, you just felt terrible for Orion Kerkering in that moment, who it was kind of relatable the way that he just sort of short-circuited. It's this high-stakes moment, and the bases are loaded, and the winning run is bearing down on home plate, and he bobbles the comebacker back to him and then makes the miscalculation, I just got to get it home. And he was too late, even if that throw had been on target. And of course, it was easy for us to all say, throw to first, and look at the replays and say, he had the play at first. But in that moment, you can understand how panic sets in and you just get flustered and you make the wrong move. And a lot had to go wrong for them even to be in that situation, of course. And, their offense just didn't show up for the most part. And they could have won any number of ways and not had to have put Orion Kirkring in that position. But unfortunately, that enters the annals of notorious playoff flubs. And he's 24 years old. It was only the NLDS, and I don't think that this is the end of the Phillies necessarily, because they've been good for a while now. They are getting older, but I think they could be back with the right moves. So I'm hoping that there is redemption ahead for Orion Kirkring, that he could potentially be the part of a future Phillies playoff run that ends in more success.
I'm not hoping for that. I hope the Phillies suffer as much as the Pirates have going forward. I feel no sympathy for them whatsoever.
That's the spirit.
Yeah. The National League Championship Series is interesting. I think if you zoom out, it's also interesting that the Dodgers obviously won the World Series last year, but the Brewers have literally never won one. The Mariners have never won one, and the Blue Jays have not won one in 31 years. Their last title, they're going on 32. Their last title in 1993. So it's basically someone is going to be a major drought buster, or it's going to be the Dodgers. The Dodgers, as we record, jumped out to a 1-0 lead in the National League Championship Series, means they've at least taken home field advantage back from the Brewers as they go back west to LA for games 3, 4, and 5. But Ben, what's really interesting to me about the Dodgers, and honestly just so goddamn annoying, is that this team that had like 14 pitchers at one time on the injured list at one point this summer now has basically no hurt pitchers who matter, and everyone is just dominating. I don't really think that this is deserved on their part. Roki Sasaki, who was supposed to be kind of the bust of the year, we talked about him numerous times when he was signing with the Dodgers and coming over. This early 20s Japanese phenom was a complete mess. And of course, the Dodgers just get him to their spring training complex in Arizona, as reported in a really good story, and turn him into a high leverage dominant reliever who is now basically their closer, though he ran into some problems in game 1 of this series. The Dodgers were duct tape and chicken wiring it, pitching for the entire year. And now they just have all of the good pitchers and they're all healthy.
Yep. Yeah, they are peaking at the right time, whether by luck or by design, or maybe luck is the residue of design, as former Dodger Branch Rickey said. But they did kind of get through it with duct tape last year, and they won the World Series that time too. So maybe you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you're a Dodgers opponent. But they are looking really strong right now because they can throw so many starters at you. And in fact, they're throwing so many starters at you in relief as well, because they don't have much of a bullpen, which is sort of their Achilles heel, or it could be, except that they're papering over that crack by just sticking starters into the bullpen. That's not only them. The Brewers have done that too, with Jacob Misiorowski and Chad Patrick, and some other teams too have done that. I'm actually writing about that this is sort of the postseason of the starter pitching in relief. But the Dodgers have really made excellent use of that so far, even though Sasaki finally did run into some struggles in game 1 here. But yeah, I'm sure that the network execs would love to have the Dodgers and the big market and all the stars back here. But if you're rooting for a matchup of teams that haven't won in a while, then they're the ones who can ruin that. Because frankly, Mariners Brewers would be a ton of fun, because either way, you're guaranteed to have a first-time World Series winner, and that's the first time that that's happened since 1980. So I think that's worth rooting for, but maybe the Dodgers will crash the party yet again, and we'll have to endure who knows how many months of hand-wringing about whether baseball is broken and needs a salary cap.
With that, it is now time for this week's Afterball. We were talking about the Seattle Mariners earlier and how Cal Raleigh hit 60 home runs as a switch-hitting catcher. That was the most home runs in Mariners history. For another bit of history, in addition to all of the history that comes with a switch-hitting catcher hitting that many home runs. But that's cool because of how many stars the Mariners have had over their history. The franchise has been around for 49 World Series-less, pennantless seasons, but it's had some incredible hitters. Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Edgar Martinez, Heck, even Ichiro, the home runs were certainly not the Hall of Famer's forte. But after Raleigh, the single-season Mariner home run leaderboard is just a bunch of Ken Griffey Jr. seasons for a while until you get down to number 7, at which point 2 Seattle Mariner alums have had 44 home run seasons. Ben, can you name either of the Mariners who are tied for 7th on the single-season home run list for that franchise without looking?
I'll just say Jay Buhner.
You're unbelievable. Folks, he's unbelievable. The other option would have been Nelson Cruz. Ben, who is your Jay Buhner or Nelson Cruz of the week?
Any Seinfeld fan knows Jay Buhner, let alone baseball fans. Well, we haven't had a chance to talk hockey since the NHL season started a week ago, so I figured I'd do that here. But maybe hockey can serve as a springboard to a broader discussion. Back in June, after the Edmonton Oilers lost to the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Finals to extend Canada's cup drought, we examined the future of the Oilers, and specifically their captain, Connor McDavid. The team's future was dependent on McDavid's because McDavid is widely considered the best hockey player on the planet. The 3-time Hart Trophy winner's 10 most statistically similar players per Hockey Reference consist of 7 Hall of Famers, including Mike Bossy, Mario Lemieux, and Oilers legend Wayne Gretzky, the only 3 players with more points than McDavid through the first 10 seasons of a career. The only non-Hall of Famers among McDavid's top comps are 3 guys who haven't been eligible for induction yet, Jaromir Jagr, Alex Ovechkin, and McDavid's longtime teammate, Leon Draisaitl. Like Draisaitl, McDavid is a career Oiler, having starred for the team ever since he was drafted first overall in 2015. The McDavid-Draisaitl duo has taken the team to 6 straight playoff appearances, including back-to-back Stanley Cup finals, but unlike the Gretzky and Mark Messier-led dynasty of the 80s, these Oilers haven't gotten to carry the cup. Whether they ever would was in greater doubt after their last loss, with McDavid under contract for only 1 more year. The NHL offseason was dominated by debate about what it would take for a team to trade for McDavid, or what it would take for Edmonton to extend him. But little of that all-consuming speculation anticipated the eventual outcome. McDavid decided to stay with Edmonton for the time being, which didn't surprise people. The details did. On the eve of the season opener, McDavid signed a 2-year, $25 million extension, which means he'll be drawing the same $12.5 million average annual salary he has since the 8-year, $100 million deal he signed in 2017 kicked in. Not only did he not get a raise, he effectively took a big pay cut, considering cap hikes and inflation, which would make that 12.5 equivalent to 15 or 16 now. In the 2018-19 season, McDavid had the highest cap hit of any player, but he's not even in the top 5 among players under contract for 2026-27. Draisaitl, for one, will make more. He signed an 8-year, $112 million extension with Edmonton last September. At the top of the list is Kirill Kaprizov, who raised the salary ceiling with the seemingly market-resetting 8-year, $136 million extension he signed with the Minnesota Wild last month, which translates to a $17 million Kaprizov hit. On a short-term contract, McDavid could have aimed even higher than that, but instead he decided to settle for a salary that makes him one of the cheapest dates in sports relative to his earning potential. If you looked up the term hometown discount in a revised sports dictionary, McDavid's deal would define it. $12.5 million is a lot of money to most of us, but it's tiny compared to the salaries for most top players in the Big 4 North American men's leagues, partly because the NHL isn't as big as the other 3. The league generates a lot less revenue than the NFL, the NBA, or MLB, and its $95.5 million salary cap this season is commensurately lower than the NFL's or the NBA's. MLB has no hard cap, of course, a testament to its stronger players' union. But even as a percentage, McDavid's salary is a steal. He could have demanded as much as 1/5 of the cap, which will increase to $104 million next year and $113.5 the following season. The headline of a piece published last week by The Athletic's Sean Gentili asked, "Is Connor David's new contract the biggest bargain in sports this century?" And in defiance of Betteridge's law of headlines, the answer wasn't obviously no. McDavid was quite clear about his motivations. "I said I was committed to winning here, and I meant that," he said, adding, "It's about winning. That's always what I've preached." Oilers GM Stan Bowman echoed Connor's commitment to our team and our city is surpassed only by his singular focus on bringing a Stanley Cup back to fans of the Edmonton Oilers. And the praise poured in from McDavid's teammates, including Draisaitl, who said, "It shows that he wants to win. He's our captain. He's our leader. He's our go-to guy. He's irreplaceable. It's a great feeling for all of us to have him for 3 more years." Defenseman Jake Wallman, whom the Oilers traded for last season and who also signed an extension last week, added, "When I found out about the number and the situation, all I could say is, what a captain that we have here." All of which made me ponder how we regard the hometown discount in an era when many analysts and media members discuss sports through a labor lens. Is a star player who takes a significant pay cut selfless for putting the team's fortunes before his own, or is he somewhat selfish for prioritizing his pursuit of a title over the chance to bolster the bidding for his union mates? If we celebrate players for making less than their worth, are we unwittingly perpetuating the notion that players who hold out for full value are greedy, thereby doing the bidding of the billionaires who benefit from those discounts? On the one hand, it seems sort of silly for us non-mega millionaires to fret about whether superstar athletes are maximizing their money. McDavid, who'll turn 29 in January, will have made more than $136 million in salary by the time his contract is complete, plus several million a year in endorsement deals. And if he plays out this contract's term, he'll have another windfall waiting for him in free agency at age 31. As McDavid said after signing his extension, referring to his miniature Bernedoodle, "Lenny's not going to go hungry with that money. We'll be fine." On the other hand, McDavid and Lenny are paupers compared to most of the ownership class, including Oilers owner Daryl Katz, who's worth an estimated $6 billion and who has bought and sold multiple mansions or apartments that aren't his primary residence for more money than McDavid will make from this extension. I'm running out of hands here, but however rich Katz may be, he can't outspend the salary cap, so McDavid's salary sacrifice doesn't just help the man who signs the Oilers' checks. It also helps, and puts pressure on, the man who assembles the Oilers' roster. Bowman, who characterized the negotiations with McDavid as extremely unusual, said, "We're going to have opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have had because Connor wanted the AAV that he did. The Wallman signing was a start. Maybe Bowman can even go get a good goalie for once." Most of Edmonton's core is 30 or older, so it's now or never for this group. As McDavid said, "There's no secret that for a team that pushes for it every year like we have for the last 4 or 5 years, we've given up first-round picks and prospects. There aren't a ton of young guys. 2 years gives us a chance to play this out. It gives us every opportunity to build something here." As we've seen in other sports, a player's personal desires can come into conflict with union solidarity. In December 2003, the MLB Players Association scuttled a trade that would have sent Alex Rodriguez to Boston after A-Rod and the Red Sox agreed to restructure his contract in a way the PA said would have reduced the deal's value. And a hometown discount for a franchise player doesn't always make miserly owners spend in other areas, as evidenced by the Cleveland Guardians' stubbornly low payrolls after Jose Ramirez signed a team-friendly extension. As for the McDavid deal's impact on other NHL stars, The Athletic's James Myrtle wrote last week that this discount, quote, "certainly doesn't drive up anyone's bargaining power. If anything, teams can go to players who want to stay and make the case that they want them to pull in McDavid, taking less to help the cause." Then again, Golden Knights center Jack Eichel dismissed the idea that McDavid's deal would hamper his own negotiations, and he and Winnipeg Jets winger Kyle Connor soon signed 8-year contracts for $13.5 and $12 million a year, respectively. Solid numbers, if not quite Kaprizov or even Draisaitl territory. Ultimately, this seems like a smart play for McDavid from a legacy perspective. Nothing endears a player to a fan base more deeply than a hometown discount, as the mutual love fest between Knicks fans and Jalen Brunson recently reminded us. And once you've reached a certain stratosphere of finances, championships might matter more than the marginal millions, as stars such as Sidney Crosby, Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant, the Miami Heatles, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and Shohei Ohtani have demonstrated. By taking less now, in hopes of ending the Oilers' title drought and claiming the first Stanley Cup for Canada since 1993, McDavid, an Ontario native, raises his chances of filling the only hole on his career resume, vaulting even higher in the all-time player rankings and becoming a bigger national hero. And if the Oilers still can't construct a championship-caliber supporting cast, despite this latest lucrative assist from a player who's already recorded 724 of them on the ice, then McDavid can depart in 2028 without anyone calling him a mercenary. Not that leaving for more promising pastures is anything most fans wouldn't do in their own professional lives. Alex, your Penguins haven't won a cup since 2017, haven't made the playoffs since 2022, but they haven't completely cratered, thanks in part to the continued cost-effective presence of Crosby, who has repeatedly re-upped at an annual rate of $8.7 million, a sort of self-tribute to his August 7th birthday and 87 jersey. What's your stance on voluntarily discounted deals?
I think that in salary-capped leagues, who cares about it from a labor perspective? I understand why, for instance, like the baseball players union would be really up in arms when players do this. But in salary-capped leagues, I fail to understand how a player taking less money could really be anti-labor or setting back the movement, because that money is just going to go somewhere else. It's all pretty tightly prescribed by the salary cap. I get why baseball would be upset about it because they don't have a cap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could hurt comparable stars. Not that there aren't many comparable stars to McDavid, but then if that money just trickles down to the next tier of players instead, then maybe it all kind of comes out in the wash. The players make just as much either way.
All billionaires are bad. That's my contribution to this conversation. It's just so hard when you look at the purses of the people at the very tip top to not want these players to make more money and to feel like they have to sacrifice in any way. It makes me feel a little icky. But I get it.
I guess you could say that the upwards pressure of a star making more and more might help the players raise the cap ceiling potentially in future negotiations, and that would benefit everyone, not just the stars. So that's sort of the bank shot argument you could make for why it might help players for an elite player to make as much as they possibly could.
That's all for this episode. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feeds right now for our treasured Slate Plus members. It is about another massive coach firing and a possibly massive associated buyout with a reported $50 million price tag in college football. That's James Franklin getting fired by Penn State. To hear it, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking try free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis for Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, and with thanks to our guests this week, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thanks for listening.
How much do you know about the scandal that got Bill Clinton impeached?
Monica Lewinsky is under the microscope, Bill Clinton is under siege, and the White House is trying to contain the damage.
Maybe you know the basics. That Clinton's presidency came to a screeching halt amid a storm of accusations involving sex, power, and partisan warfare.
If it turns out to be true, it could be the end of Clinton's presidency.
Congress is rushing to overthrow the commander-in-chief.
What determines who we believe and whose side we take in a political fight?
Trip and secretly tape Monica Lewinsky.
Go down to Radio Shack and buy a tape recorder and plug it into your phone.
What does it mean to abuse one's power?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
It is absolutely staggering that the fate of the most powerful man on the planet is in the hands of a completely unknown 23-year-old intern.
Subscribe to Slow Burn and Apple Podcasts.
In late August 1992, Randy Weaver and his family were refusing to come down from the remote Idaho mountaintop where they lived.
Weaver, a fugitive on a federal firearms charge, has been holed up in a cabin near Naples for more than a year.
The government thought Randy Weaver was a dangerous, possibly violent extremist. Randy and his wife, Vicky, thought the government was an agent of Satan on Earth. When it was all over, 3 people were dead, and the government had spent millions of dollars to catch one man. We'll find out why the siege at Ruby Ridge unfolded the way it did, and think about some of the questions it raises. What should we do about white supremacists? Why has the story of Ruby Ridge become an enduring myth for the far right? And whose fault was it anyway? Subscribe to Standoff: What Happened at Ruby Ridge in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.